people use that as like an invalidation for like trans people, when in reality it's basically pushing the idea that you could teach a boy that they are a girl. If you are just pointing to their genitalia and you're like, oh, you have these phenotypical sex characteristics, that means you're a girl, or that means you're a boy, you should act like one, you should be socialized as one. So a long time ago, I responded to a comment. I'm not entirely sure what the context of it was. Actually, let me dig in deep and find the context of it. Let me find the context of everything. Jesus Christ. I've been enjoying the lack of drama recently, so I didn't want to talk more about Kirsche Bade quote tweeting a white supremacist that wants to force his Christian nationalistic ideology onto everyone with something so disgusting as just too much. There was oh, there was this tweet from Kirsche. Quote tweeting Matt Walsh being like, oh, the BLM movement was killed by body cameras. This person was like, you're an actual pedophilic groomer. Nobody should ever take you seriously. You make normal trans people look bad by being every negative stereotype you can. One time I replied with, so children can't consent to life-saving medical treatment? Okay, gotcha. Why do you force gender reassignment surgeries on intersex babies? I have no issues with gender-affirming surgeries for cis boys with gynecomastia. To prevent the physical and social developmental disorders that would be tied to hermaphroditism. Treating a mutation or illness is different from inflicting them. I mean, you know, by that logic, if you think that, like, intersex infants, you know, they have like physical or social developmental disorders, that would in theory mean that if you're trans and if you have severe gender dysphoria, you are treating the physical and social developmental disorder by using these things. And it just went on to, gender and sex are identical terms. The only attempt at the distinction is research by two widely discredited child abusers. Look up John Money for what you're basing this garbage off of. People just don't understand the teachings of John Money. His abusive experiment literally proved that gender and sex are different things. So this person replied with, factually incorrect yet again. It's genuinely the truth. If you're too lazy to look it up, I can link him. The first time a right-winger is using Wikipedia as a source. That's incredible. This lie was concocted in the 50s by these genuine monsters abusing children. So I replied with, John Money had a thesis and proved it wrong with his experiment, which actually proved us correct. Maybe actually look into his work before you show everyone that you're an uneducated weirdo. So I had some weirdo who was like, I had Nyara block me and Nyara defended John Money or something. And then this person was like, found it, had to check my archives, :3. And Greg said was, ain't no way this motherfucker was defending John Money. It's like, I wasn't. How was I defending that? John Money had a thesis and proved it wrong. John Money wasn't even the first dude to study trans people. Magnus Hirschfeld was doing trans surgeries like 50 years before him. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true. But that's why they are like pushing the idea that like transgenderism is like a Jewish invention. He would have been on their side. Yeah. His entire thesis, like I responded with, John Money had a theory about how gender is determined by genitalia to justify cruel gender reassignment surgeries on intersex infants with ambiguous genitalia. This was proven wrong. He like invented a field. He had like a thesis and then he invented the field of like, what was it? Sextology or something. So his experiment was basically to like justify that like if you have like an intersex child with ambiguous genitalia, whatever you pick and then you socialize them according to their phenotypical sex characteristic, then they are going to develop this way. In order to test this theory, because he couldn't test it, he was just like, I don't know, he just like came up with this hypothesis and everybody like took his word for it and like celebrated, and he was like on tour and there was like no evidence for it. It was just like, he just came up with it. And then there was the boy whose circumcision was being botched, and the parents saw John Money on TV, so they called him up. And it's like, oh, we have two twin boys and one had a botched circumcision and we don't know what to do with it. Like, we can't raise him as like, you know, a crippled boy. His thesis would suggest that like, oh, if he would do the genital surgery and just raise him as a girl, then he would feel like a girl and like be okay with being socialized as a girl. And like in his cruel experiment, it was like making both undress and then being like, oh, what does your brother have? What do you have? You're a girl. You should act like a girl. You should be okay with being a girl. And the thing is like, he didn't want to wear dresses. He didn't feel comfortable being socialized as a girl because he wasn't a girl. Like his gender identity wasn't that of a girl, it was that of a boy. And it was just like really abusive and like basically a similar thing of like what cishet people, like conservatives, do during like conversion therapy, right? It's like, oh, you do not have like the proper genitalia, you should act this way. And that just didn't work. It was just like a really cruel experiment and it was baseless. It was just like the hypothesis. He made up the field. He was being like celebrated as like, like the hero in this field because like he fucking made it up. And now people use that as like an invalidation for like trans people. When in reality, it's basically pushing the idea that you could teach a boy that they are a girl. That is just what it is, right? That is what the hypothesis was. If you adjust someone's genitalia, or like if you are just pointing to their genitalia and you're like, oh, you have these phenotypical sex characteristics, that means you're a girl, or that means you're a boy, you should act like one, you should be socialized as one. If you don't feel comfortable with that, if you don't resonate with that, if you feel dysphoria, if you feel distress, that is just something that has to be drilled out of you. You just gotta get abused harder. I really wish David's parents waited for penile reconstruction to develop more. We had first surgery of that nature in 1936, so surely there would have been someone who could have helped him. If I recall correctly, John Money wanted to do a second surgery, a second genital reconstruction surgery on David, and he knew, like, he didn't want that because he knew that if he would get that, then there was no turning back. John Money was like basically trying to force him to go through that because he thought that like if he had like another surgery, then finally he would realize that he's actually a girl. And I also know that like the parents weren't even like involved. They didn't know what John Money was actually doing to both of the boys. And when it finally came out that like, hey, David is born male, born a boy, the brother didn't take it well because he was constantly under the impression that like he has to protect his little sister because he was being abused too by going through all of that, and he had like engraved into him that he has like a little sister that he needs to protect and take care of and so on. And then it turns out that like his little sister is actually his little brother. For some reason he just like didn't take it well because he felt a certain way, like a protective nature over another man, basically. I will never defend this. It is crazy to come to the conclusion that because I said that like, oh, John Money had a thesis, made like a field for it, proved it wrong with his experiment. Like, it proves trans people right. It basically shows that you cannot abuse a boy to be a girl. No matter how hard you try, you cannot turn a boy into a girl. So you cannot turn a trans girl into a cis boy. It's just not possible. You cannot turn a trans boy into a cis girl. What trans people are doing, using like gender affirming care, social transitioning, and so on, is turning a boy into a boy, turning a girl into a girl. But these people, obviously, nobody actually cares about like the facts of the thing. It's just about like feelings, and then they're mischaracterizing these things, and they're leaving out details, and then they're making the YouTube video about it that's getting boosted to like hundreds of thousands of people, and then it's just being spreaded as like, oh, the transgenderism was invented by John Money, who abused a boy and taught the boy that he's a girl. It's just missing the point, right? It's like they're so close to getting it, but they just can't, like, they don't want to admit to like this last percentile because their whole rhetoric would fall apart and then it wouldn't be as lucrative to like push this propaganda. The people who are like understanding that, you know, John Money wasn't the father of transgenderism. When they say like transgenderism, they're talking about trans people, you know, they're making it seem like some sort of like ideology. Then they're going to like Magnus Hirschfeld, who was a little bit more progressive, but still was also like, if you're a trans woman, you have to be like sterilized, or, you know, he was like pro putting that into like passports that you're like trans and stuff like that, putting you on a list. Oh, if you want to be a real woman, you need to like medically transition type of thing. It's like 100 years ago, right? A lot of things changed in 100 years, and I wish the research wouldn't have been destroyed. Imagine where we would be right now with like trans healthcare and like societal stuff if the Nazis didn't burn it down.